They say nothing good happens after midnight. But when you're broke, behind on rent, and desperate for a job, you'll take anything, especially a quiet night shift that promises minimal customer interaction and a weekly paycheck that doesn't bounce. So here I am, standing outside a lonely Burger King on the edge of a forgotten town called Ashbine. It's almost 10:50 p.m. The sign flickers like it's trying to stay alive. The parking lot is empty except for my rusted Civic and a single delivery truck parked out back with its lights off. The wind is cold, and there's a damp smell in the air, like old grease and something sweeter. Rotten sweet. I step inside. The bell above the door lets out a weak chime, like it's been rung too many times. Inside, the place looks exactly like every other Burger King you've ever been in, only older. Tiles cracked. Soda machines humming too loud. Lights a shade too dim. A guy in a faded uniform nods at me from behind the counter. Early 30s, maybe. Big bags under his eyes. He moves like he's been through war. His name tag says Kevin. "You're the new guy, right?" he asks. "Dave," I say. "Night shift." He forces a smile. "Lucky you." He doesn't give me a tour. Doesn't explain how anything works. Just hands me a folder and says, "Everything you need is in here." Then he points to a grimy little office in the back. "Oh, and read the rules. Stick to them." I mean it. Then he leaves. I stand there for a second, folder in hand, trying to figure out if he was joking. He wasn't. I could feel it. The way he said, "I mean it," made my stomach twist. The office smells like cigarettes and old paperwork. There's a small desk, an ancient security monitor showing grainy camera feeds, and a metal filing cabinet with a dent in it. I sit down and open the folder. There's a schedule, emergency numbers, a laminated sheet with my duties. And then there's this. Night shift protocol, Ashbine branch. Strict rules to follow after midnight. 1. Do not look directly at the camera in the freezer after 1:17 a.m. 2. If the drive-thru speaker turns on by itself, do not respond. 3. From 3:01 to 3:15 a.m., no music is to be played under any circumstance. 4. If a man with no eyes approaches the counter, lock the doors. 5. Do not speak to the children in the playground. 6. The lights will flicker at 4:44 a.m. This is normal. Do not react. 7. Only use the red mop. Never the blue one. 8. If someone asks for the secret combo, go to the bathroom and hide. 9. The fryer must be turned off precisely at 5 a.m. Not before. Not after. 10. If you hear your name whispered from the vents, leave the building. I laugh. A nervous, dry sound. Clearly, someone here has a dark sense of humor. But deep down, something in me knows this list wasn't made for fun. I glance up at the freezer cam on the monitor. The feed is clear. Static, but nothing strange. Still, I feel watched. I push the sheet aside and try to focus on real tasks. Stock counts. Cleaning schedules. But I keep glancing at the rules. 11:59 p.m. The clock ticks over to midnight. I start my first shift. Alone. Outside, fog crawls in over the parking lot like fingers reaching for the door. Inside, the soda machine lets out a long hiss, unprompted. And in the drive-thru speaker, a soft crackle, then a low voice whispering, "Dave?" My blood turns cold. I haven't told anyone my name since I got here. Not out loud. Not to anyone but Kevin. I stare at the speaker. I don't say a word. Because now, I believe the rules are real. And this is only night 1. The second night felt colder. Not outside. The sky over Ashbine was just as starless, the air just as still. But inside the Burger King, the temperature seemed to drop as soon as I stepped through the back door. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual. Even the fryer, usually warming up with a soft hiss, was dead silent. I walked in, clocked in at exactly 10:59 p.m., and glanced at the laminated sheet still taped to the wall beside the manager's office. Night shift rules, read carefully. Follow exactly. Rule 1. Do not play any music between 3:01 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. Rule 2. If the fryer begins to bubble red, shut off all appliances and leave the kitchen immediately. Rule 3. Do not open the back freezer unless you hear 3 knocks. No more. No less. Rule 4. Never speak to the man with no eyes. There were 10 rules in total. I hadn't memorized them yet, but something about them stuck in my brain like splinters. They weren't funny. They weren't some joke left by bored workers. Something in my gut told me these rules mattered. And last night's whisper on the drive-thru speaker, saying my sister's name, that wasn't funny either. Still, I was tired. Maybe the whisper was in my head. Maybe I was just stressed, adjusting to this strange job in this strange little town. I tried to shrug it off, tried to convince myself I was overthinking things. By 2:45 a.m., the store was quiet. No customers, no delivery trucks, no sound at all but the fryer sizzling gently. Bored, I pulled out my phone. I always kept a playlist for late shifts, old rock, smooth instrumentals. Something about music made the night move faster. I hesitated for a second, staring at the time. 2:59 a.m. Rule 1 said no music after 3:01 a.m. I still had 2 minutes. It was stupid, right? These rules couldn't be real. I tapped play. The music filled the kitchen, soft and mellow. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The song helped. It gave life to the stillness. Then I blinked. The fryer wasn't sizzling anymore. It was boiling. The oil began to churn like a stormy sea. Bubbles the size of fists rose and popped, releasing a dark, reddish foam. I stepped back, heart thudding in my chest. What the hell? I reached to turn off the fryer, but the lights above flickered. Once. Twice. Then they went out completely. The entire restaurant plunged into darkness. My phone screen glowed faintly in my hand. I turned off the music immediately. The silence after it stopped was too thick, like the building was holding its breath. A voice whispered through the darkness. Not over the speakers. Not in my head. Right behind me. Where's Sarah? I froze. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not out loud. Not since my sister vanished. She disappeared when I was 17. Just gone. No signs. No leads. Just her shoes on the porch and the front door wide open. I turned slowly. The kitchen was still dark, but in the faint green glow of the emergency exit sign, I saw something by the drive-through window. A shape. Thin. Still. Its face was pressed against the glass, but there were no features, just smooth skin where the eyes should have been. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a mop bucket. That's when the lights flicked back on. The fryer was normal again, bubbling gently like nothing had happened. The figure at the window was gone. I stood there for a long minute, trying to catch my breath. I looked back at the rule sheet. My eyes scanned to Rule 1. I read it again. Then again. My hands were shaking. I didn't press play on the music for the rest of the night. And the whisper? The thing at the window? They didn't come back. But now I believed. The rules weren't a joke. They were a warning. I was wiping down the front counter when the door chimed, soft and slow, like it didn't want to disturb the silence. It was 3:48 a.m. I glanced up, expecting another stray raccoon or one of those weird late-night regulars who never speak. But instead, a man in a perfectly ironed Burger King suit walked in. He wore a red tie too bright for this hour, a clipboard in one hand, and a smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. His name tag read Eric in neat bold letters, but it might as well have said trouble. "Good evening," he said, voice smooth as melted cheese. "You must be Dave." I nodded, trying not to show how uneasy I felt. Something about his presence made the room feel colder. "I'm Eric Maddox," he said, extending a hand. I shook it, and instantly regretted it. His skin was too dry, like paper left out in the sun. "Regional manager. I like to check in on new hires, especially those on the night shift." He didn't blink much. Just stared a second too long. I forced a polite chuckle. Not many managers do surprise visits at 4 in the morning. He smiled wider. "I'm not most managers." He started walking toward the kitchen, inspecting everything with calm precision. Like he'd walked through this place 1,000 times before. His shoes made no sound on the greasy tile. "I see you've read the rule sheet," he said over his shoulder. "Yeah, about that," I said, following behind. "Is that like a joke or something? Some weird employee hazing?" Eric turned around slowly. "Do you think it's a joke, Dave?" I hesitated. My mind flashed back to the bubbling fryer. The whisper through the drive-through speaker. The girl who looked like my sister. "I don't know what I think." He nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Doubt means you're paying attention." Then he walked into the office like he owned the place. Which, technically, I guess he did. He sat down in the manager's chair, leaned back, and steepled his fingers. "You should understand something. This location is different." "Different how?" "There are things in this world that don't care much for rules," he said. "But here, inside these walls, rules are what keep everything together. Think of them as anchors." He leaned forward now, his voice lowering just enough to make me lean in too. "If you follow the rules, you'll be safe. If you break them, even once, the building notices. And the building is far less forgiving than I am." I swallowed hard. "So you're saying, the rules are real?" Eric stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. I'm saying don't test them. Others did. They're no longer with us. There was something final in his tone. Heavy, like a brick being placed on a coffin. He paused at the doorway, then turned one last time. One more thing, Dave. I waited. If you ever see someone mopping the floor between 2 o'clock and 2:30 a.m., he said, do not speak to them. Not even a hello. Just walk away. Fast. And with that, he left. No footsteps. No sound. Just the chime of the door and the echo of his words bouncing off the greasy walls. I stood there for a long time, staring at the office chair that was still spinning slightly, as if he hadn't really walked out. As if maybe he never did. The clock on the wall ticked to 4 a.m. I turned, looked at the laminated rules one more time, and I felt like they were watching me back. It started like any other shift. The building creaked when the wind hit just right, and the fluorescent lights above the fryers buzzed with that low, sickly hum I'd grown used to. I clocked in a few minutes early, wiping down the counters while watching the security monitors out of the corner of my eye. Midnight came and went. No customers. Just the usual silence that wrapped around this place like a heavy fog. But then, at exactly 12:37 a.m., the motion detector light at the drive-thru clicked on. I glanced at the monitor. There was someone there. A young girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, stood alone outside the window. She didn't knock. She didn't say anything. She just stared at the speaker box. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, like the color had been drained from her. She wore a red hoodie and held a small stuffed bear under her arm. My heart stopped. She looked exactly like my sister, but that was impossible. I hadn't seen my sister in over a decade. She disappeared when I was 17. No leads. No answers. Just one day gone. I pushed open the drive-thru window. Hey, are you okay? Are you lost? She turned toward me slowly like it took effort. Her eyes were strange, too glossy, too still. I just want fries, she said. Her voice was thin, like it was stretched across a distance that didn't make sense. I didn't know what to say. I backed away from the window, grabbed a small fry from under the lamp, and slid it out to her. But when I looked back, she was gone. The fry box sat untouched on the ledge. The motion light clicked off. I checked the cameras. Nothing. The tape rolled back without any sign of her. Just an empty lot. No child. No shadow. Nothing. I should have stopped there. I should have called someone. But instead, I stepped outside. The night air hit me like a slap. It was colder than it had any right to be. I walked around the side of the building, shining my phone flashlight into the bushes. Then I saw it. On the ground, just under the edge of the trash bin, was a crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up. The handwriting was jagged, like it was written with shaking hands. The freezer knows the truth. My skin prickled. I glanced toward the back door, the one that led to the freezer. It was closed. Locked. Just like I left it. Still, something felt wrong. I went back inside. The smell of the fryer oil suddenly seemed sour. The lights above the counter flickered once. Then again. I glanced at the rule sheet taped to the office wall. Rule number 7 flashed in my mind. If you see someone you know, but they shouldn't be there, do not speak to them. Too late. I stayed behind the counter for the rest of the shift, eyes darting between cameras and windows, waiting for something, anything, to move. But nothing did. When morning came and the sun began to rise over the trees, the Burger King looked normal again. Bright. Harmless. Like none of it had happened. But I knew better. That girl wasn't just a ghost. She was a warning. And I had no idea what I had just awakened. Not yet. I had to know what was behind that freezer. For 3 nights straight, I'd heard something tapping from back there. Not a sound you'd normally hear in a place like this. It wasn't mechanical, not the hum of a fan or the drip of condensation. It was deliberate, like someone tapping their knuckle in a slow, patient rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I waited until the clock hit 3:33 a.m., the hour when the air always turned heavier and the silence stretched longer. I grabbed my flashlight and pushed into the walk-in freezer, breath fogging up instantly. The cold bit into my skin, but I was more focused on the far wall. Something had always felt off about it. The tiles didn't line up perfectly. There was a hair-thin crack that ran along the edges. I ran my hand along the surface. Then I felt it. One of the tiles was loose. Heart pounding, I pried it off with the flat end of a spatula I'd brought along. It popped free with a soft click, revealing not wires or insulation but blackness. A hollow pocket behind the wall. I shoved my hand in and felt around. Wood. A small handle. I pulled. The wall groaned and gave way, revealing a narrow, slanted staircase. It descended sharply into darkness, the smell of mildew and rot creeping out like a living thing. The light from my flashlight barely pierced the pitch. Still, I couldn't stop myself. I stepped down. The air shifted with every step, like I was entering a different world. The temperature dropped even further. My breath felt heavy, like it was being filtered through water. The walls were lined with peeling posters, old Burger King ads from the 80s and 90s, faded and yellowed. A dusty sign read, "Training Wing Authorized Staff Only." When I reached the bottom, the stairway opened into a small basement room. That's when I saw them. VHS tapes. Dozens of them. Each one labeled with a name and a date written in red marker. Some names I recognized, Calamanda, even Jordan, the guy who trained me and then disappeared. Others were unknown. But the dates stretched back decades. There was a small TV VCR combo sitting on a wooden table. I wiped the dust off and picked one tape at random. Manager 47, Violation 6. My hands trembled as I slid it into the VCR and hit play. Static. Then the image flickered. A man in a Burger King uniform stood behind the front counter. Everything looked normal at first. Then the timestamp on the corner began jumping around. 2:55 a.m., then 3:01, then 3:06. The camera glitched as the man turned toward the drive-through window. He froze. Then something crawled into the frame. I don't know how to describe it. Tall, hunched, wrapped in what looked like plastic bags. It didn't walk. It dragged itself. The man screamed. The feed went black. When the image returned, the man was gone. Just gone. Uniform still there. Headset on the ground. But no body. I yanked the tape out, heart racing. This wasn't some prank. This wasn't a weird initiation test. This place had a history, one they buried underneath frozen patties and fries. I looked around again and noticed a filing cabinet against the far wall. Inside were incident reports, handwritten logs, and more disturbing photos. In one, a young employee stood smiling with Eric, same haircut, same uniform as he wore now. The photo was dated 1983. My chest tightened. Eric hadn't aged a day. Something was wrong with him. With this place. With everything. And then I heard it again. The tapping. Not from the freezer. From inside the stairwell. This time it wasn't patient. It was fast. Angry. I grabbed a tape at random, shoved it into my hoodie pocket, and bolted up the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't look back. I slammed the freezer shut, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the buzzing lights. I'd seen too much. But it was only the beginning. Because now I had proof. And something told me I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. The freezer's porthole window had been fogged up again, the strange, damp mist creeping across the glass, just like the night I first saw her. My sister. I was beginning to lose track of the days, but the sense of something wrong was growing clearer. More real, in a way I couldn't shake. I stood there, staring at the thick layer of condensation forming against the glass. I knew the rules by heart by now, but the thought of the hidden staircase, of what I'd already seen in the basement, kept gnawing at me. The security footage, too, how it never captured certain people, things that shouldn't have existed in the first place. My stomach twisted with the same sick feeling I'd had when I first stepped foot in this godforsaken place. I had to know. I had to. So, in the dead of night, with only the buzzing hum of the fridge for company, I dug deeper into the pile of tapes I'd found hidden behind the freezer. They were all labeled, names, dates, and numbers scrawled across the plastic casings like forgotten tombstones. My hands shook as I pulled one from the stack. The label read Eric, 86. No last name, just Eric. The same Eric who'd been showing up, smiling too much, like he was savoring some secret I wasn't yet allowed to know. The VHS player whirred as I slid the tape in, the screen flickering for a moment before revealing a low-lit room. It was unmistakably the Burger King. Same walls, same blue and yellow tiles, but it looked different. Older somehow. The fluorescent lights were dimmer, and the faces of the employees looked haunted. And then there he was. Eric. The man I'd been seeing every shift. The one who had been lurking around, giving me instructions in his cold, cheerful voice. But this version of him, he looked younger, sure, but there was something more off about him, something that made my skin crawl. His eyes, while clear, had that same unsettling gleam. Like he was waiting for something to happen, something inevitable. "Welcome," he said to the camera, his voice smooth but lacking any warmth. It was the same tone I'd heard him use when he talked to me, but it was colder now. More calculated. If you're watching this, it's too late. They're part of you now. My breath caught in my throat. What did that mean? I pressed my hand to my mouth, afraid to make a sound as the tape continued to play. Eric stood there, looking straight into the camera, his eyes practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. It was like he was looking into my soul, watching me through time, through the lens of that old, grainy footage. He chuckled, but it was dry, like there was no humor left in it. The building, he said slowly, doesn't want to be forgotten. You'll learn that soon enough. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't want to hear this, didn't want to know what was coming next. But I couldn't stop watching. It was like I was trapped in some sick, twisted loop, unable to pull myself out of it. The rules are there for a reason, Eric continued, his voice softening, almost like he was warning me. Enforce them, and you'll survive. Break them, and you'll become one of the others. The ones who disappear. He stepped closer to the camera, his face filling the screen. There was something almost alive about the way he looked. It wasn't just his youth or his smile, it was his presence, like he belonged there. But I knew deep down that wasn't possible. And if you ever try to leave, Eric whispered now, the words making my skin prickle, they'll make sure you never forget why you stayed. The tape ended abruptly. Static filled the screen, crackling and hissing, and I sat there, staring at the empty blackness, unable to move. The silence felt too loud, like a warning I couldn't ignore. My heart thudded in my chest, and I was stuck in place, unable to comprehend the gravity of what I had just seen. The rules were more than just rules. They were a boundary between sanity and whatever it was Eric had become. The thing he warned about, the thing I was becoming just by staying here. I knew one thing for sure, I had to get out. But what if leaving was exactly what they wanted? I looked over at the freezer door, the same one I'd heard banging in the night, and I could have sworn I saw movement behind it. For a split second, I thought I saw someone, or something, pressing its face against the glass. My blood ran cold. I had no choice now. I had to escape, before I became one of the others. The rules had never seemed so real. I stood behind the counter, staring at the laminated rules sheet taped to the wall. I was trembling, even though the air inside the Burger King was thick with heat, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like they were mocking me. My breath felt heavy in my chest as the minutes crept by. 2:45 a.m., 2:46 a.m., 2:47 a.m. Every single rule on that list had been drilled into my brain, each one haunting me like a ghost that wouldn't leave. I hadn't broken any of them, not until tonight. But now, I felt something snapping inside me. Something that told me I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep following these rules, not without losing myself completely. I broke the first one. No music between 3:01 and 3:15. It felt like the air around me had thickened, suffocating me with its heavy silence. The radio, cheap and crackling from its years of neglect, was the only source of sound in the place. I turned the dial, the static giving way to a soft, haunting melody. Maybe it wasn't such a big deal. Maybe I was just overthinking it. The hum of the fryer continued its constant rhythm, and I started wiping down the counter, my eyes never leaving the clock on the wall. I watched it tick forward. 3:01 a.m. The moment the minute hand clicked into place, the first ripple of something wrong swept through the air. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a flicker of light overhead. Then a sharp hiss, the fryers, which had been still for hours, suddenly sputtered to life. The smell of burnt grease filled the air. I froze. The fryer was bubbling furiously, as if something was fighting to get out. Then a loud pop. And then it started, whispers. Soft at first, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. Dave. I looked over at the speaker, the one by the drive-thru. It was buzzing like it always did, but this time the static cleared up, and I heard it again, my name, but this time clearer, colder. Dave, it's time. My heart skipped a beat, and I nearly dropped the cloth I was holding. I turned and looked around, feeling as if someone had just stepped into the room behind me. But there was no one. Just the fryer. The ever-bubbling fryer. And the walls. The walls that seemed to be closing in on me, their shadows shifting like they had a life of their own. I stepped back, my shoes squeaking on the tiled floor. It didn't feel real. None of this felt real. But I knew deep down, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The rules were alive. The building itself was watching me. Then the phone rang. It was an old-fashioned landline, the kind that felt like it belonged to another time. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to know who was on the other end. But I felt an overwhelming need to answer. I picked up the receiver, my hands shaking. Hello? My voice was barely above a whisper, as if the room itself was too fragile for sound. Silence, and then a deep, gravelly voice filled the line, chilling me to the bone. "Dave, you broke the rules." It was Eric's voice, but it wasn't like anything I'd ever heard from him. This wasn't the same smooth, corporate tone he always used. This was darker, like something was in him. Or perhaps, something had always been there. "You shouldn't have done that, Dave." The voice was softer now, like a warning. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My hand tightened around the receiver, but I couldn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. A sharp, insistent rap that made my heart stop. I didn't know who would be out there at this hour. We hadn't had a customer in hours, and it was past closing time. I stepped cautiously toward the door, the shadows of the room growing longer as I walked. The kitchen behind me felt colder, the light over the fryer dimming like it was retreating into the dark. The knock came again, louder. I reached for the handle, hesitated. My mind screamed for me to step back, to leave. But my hand was already on the cold metal, turning it slowly. The door creaked open, and then the world tilted. There was no one there. Just the dim glow of the parking lot, the empty stretch of highway, and the thick, suffocating fog that had rolled in from nowhere. A chill ran through me, and I slammed the door shut. My breath was ragged. I was losing it. I had to be. There was no other explanation for this madness. I turned around, my eyes darting to the clock again. 3:10 a.m. The minutes stretched out longer now. The walls were closing in on me. I could feel them pressing in, like something was trying to crawl out of the shadows. I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening, what Eric had to do with all of this. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the laminated sheet of rules off the wall, crumpling it in my hand. I had to break them all. I had to. I tore out the back door, my feet pounding against the wet ground as I ran toward the back of the building. The freezer was locked, as it always was, but tonight, I wasn't going to be stopped. I turned the handle, feeling the cold steel bite into my skin, and yanked it open. The air inside was freezing, and it was darker than I remembered. There was something behind me now moving. Something I couldn't see. But I could feel it. I could feel its eyes. Its cold breath on the back of my neck. And that voice, still echoing in my mind. "You're breaking the rules, Dave. You're breaking them all." I knew then that I couldn't leave. Not anymore. I stood behind the counter, my hands shaking. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. The sounds of the restaurant felt distant, muffled, like they were coming from underwater. I could still hear the whispers, faint and guttural, slipping through the vents. They were calling my name, repeating it over and over, as if they were begging me to stay. I couldn't stay. Not anymore. The fire alarm was a cruel joke now. The building had absorbed the heat of 1,000 failed attempts to escape, and it was beyond saving. But I had to try. It was the only option left. I had to burn it down, to sever the ties, to end whatever hold this place had over me. The kitchen was eerily still. The fryers sat idle, the grease cold and untouched. The soft hum of the overhead lights was the only sound, a constant reminder that the Burger King, despite all its horrors, still had a pulse. I glanced over at the gas line switch beside the back door. My breath caught in my throat as I approached it. It was the one thing I hadn't touched yet, the one rule I hadn't broken. If I did this, there was no going back. The building would burn, and so would everything inside it. But maybe, just maybe, it would set me free. With trembling fingers, I twisted the valve. A hiss of gas filled the air. The smell was overpowering, like rotten eggs, like death. I stepped back, my heart racing. I could feel the weight of it now, the decision, the inevitability of what I was about to do. The fire would spread quickly. The building would collapse in on itself, consumed by its own greed for souls. "Dave." The voice was soft, but it froze me in place. I turned toward the sound, my blood turning to ice. There, standing by the freezer, was Eric. He smiled, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. It was the same smile he had worn every time he visited, that cold, polished grin that made me feel like a puppet on a string. But there was something different now. His face was twisted, almost inhuman. His skin seemed too tight, stretched over his bones like it didn't belong. His clothes, once pristine, were now stained with something darker, something I couldn't place. "You really think this will end it?" His voice was almost a laugh, deep and guttural, like he was enjoying this. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every inch of my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't look away. I had to finish this. For once, I needed to be the one in control. Without thinking, I lit the match. The tiny flame flickered in the still air, casting shadows that danced wildly on the walls. The scent of sulfur burned my nostrils as I dropped the match to the floor. The fire took hold instantly, licking the walls with a fierce hunger. It spread faster than I expected, moving with a terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path. The flickering lights above me buzzed, then shattered, filling the room with a bright, blinding flash. Eric didn't move. He stood there, watching me, his smile still in place. The flames reflected in his eyes, but they didn't seem to reach him. He was untouchable. I turned to run, my feet pounding against the tile floor. But as I reached the door, something held me back, a tug at my chest, as if the building itself was pulling me toward it. I glanced over my shoulder. The flames were rising higher now, consuming the ceiling. Smoke curled in thick, black tendrils, but the air around me remained cold, almost sterile. The fire shouldn't have been like this. It should have been hot, overwhelming, suffocating. But it wasn't. It felt controlled, like it had always been here waiting. I burst through the door, stumbling into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face, but it was a welcome relief. I didn't stop running. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The heat from the building burned my skin, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn back. I ran until my legs gave out, until my body couldn't take any more. And then I collapsed, lying on the damp earth, staring up at the sky. The stars blinked down at me, cold and indifferent. The sound of crackling fire echoed in the distance, but it was fading. The flames had stopped. The building was still there. I couldn't breathe. I looked back toward the Burger King, my heart sinking. It was intact. The flames had vanished, as if they had never existed at all. The building stood in the middle of nowhere, as pristine and untouched as it had been when I first arrived. No smoke, no ashes, nothing. Just the same old fast food restaurant. I was losing my mind. I had to be. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my vision. But there it was. The same sign. The same parking lot. The same Burger King. I stood, my legs shaky, and walked back toward it. The door swung open before I could touch it. Inside, the lights were on again. The fryers were bubbling, the whirring of the machines filling the air. And behind the counter, Eric, smiling at me. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" he said, his voice like silk. "You should have followed the rules, Dave. Now you're one of us." The door closed behind me with a soft click. I was trapped. The wind howled through the cracked window of my car, tugging at the tattered edges of my jacket as I stared out into the darkness. The night seemed endless, just like the empty road that stretched out ahead of me. Ashbine had become a ghost town, a place that no longer felt real. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept properly, or when I'd last felt like I wasn't being watched. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life as if reluctant to disturb the silence. The car's interior was a mess, empty coffee cups, crumpled receipts, and my one last possession, the VHS tape I had found in that cursed Burger King. I hadn't dared watch it again. The images had haunted me for days, replaying in my mind, twisted and warped. The faint static, Eric's smiling face, his eyes were too wide, too knowing. I couldn't escape him. I reached for the stack of papers on the passenger seat. The same papers that had once been laminated rules, those damn rules that had almost cost me my sanity, my life. I had broken every single one of them in a desperate attempt to end it all, to destroy that cursed place. But it didn't end. It just shifted. The Burger King had burned, yet it still stood, waiting for someone else. Someone new. Someone like me. The soft flicker of light from a nearby street lamp illuminated the edges of a new envelope sitting on top of the stack. It was thin, almost too thin. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. It wasn't postmarked, no return address, just the Burger King logo stamped in the corner. I ripped it open. Inside was a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, as if it had been handled 100 times before. My heart sank as I unfolded it. The familiar list stared back at me, more cryptic than before. The rules were the same, but the weight of them had changed. There was something about them now, something that felt heavier. Rule 1. Do not acknowledge the man in the paper crown. Rule 2. The freezer is not a storage area. Rule 3. If you hear the hum, you are not alone. Rule 4. Do not follow the shadows in the bathroom. Rule 5. You will not be paid until the shift is over. I felt a cold sweat slide down my back. This wasn't the same. It wasn't a joke anymore. The rules had been real. And now they were calling me back, pulling me in. The paper slipped from my hands, fluttering down onto the seat. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes, trying to push away the panic rising in my chest. But I couldn't. I knew what this meant. They were giving me a choice, even though there wasn't a choice at all. The Burger King would find me. I was marked. It had already begun. A knock on the window made me jump. My heart slammed against my ribcage as I turned, too fast, too violently. The shadow outside the car was tall, its outline barely visible against the night. I squinted through the glass. It was him. Eric. His smile was wide, impossibly wide. It stretched across his face like a mask. His eyes, still too bright, too unnerving, locked onto mine. His hand raised slowly, pointing at the car door, his fingers curling as though inviting me to open it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My hands were frozen to the steering wheel, my whole body rigid with fear. Then he spoke. "You're late, Dave." The words echoed in my skull, and before I knew it, my hand was reaching for the door handle. It was as if my body moved without me, like some invisible force had taken control. My mind screamed at me to stop, but the door clicked open, the cold air rushing in. Eric stepped closer, the faintest scent of grease and stale air surrounding him. "It's time to go back," he whispered, his voice soft but unshakable. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my mouth was dry. There was no escape. I knew it now. The Burger King had me, and no matter where I went, no matter what I tried, I was always going to be pulled back. I looked down at the envelope, still sitting in the passenger seat, the rules still fresh in my mind. I hadn't finished reading them, but I already knew what was coming. Eric stepped into the car, his smile never fading. "It's only a matter of time before you follow the rules, Dave. Everyone does." I swallowed hard, forcing the words out, but they came out as nothing more than a breathless whisper. I can't go back." He chuckled, low and hollow. "You already have." Before I could protest, the door slammed shut. The car engine roared to life, as if on command, and I felt the pull, the hunger. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless. And somewhere far behind, I could hear the faint, ghostly hum of the drive-through speaker. I was already on my way back.